Velkommen til Rig på Viden, din podcast om investering, finans og økonomi. Mit navn er Benjamin Somofen.
Episoden har vi lavet i samarbejde med Nordic Finance and the Good Society for at kaste nyt lys på finanssektoren i Norden og diskutere en mere ansvarlig retning for sektoren i fremtiden. Målet om at udbrede forskning inden for området og skabe debat om den finansielle sektor støtter vi 100% op om. Tag et kig på deres hjemmeside nfgs.dk, hvor der ligger masser af fed forskning og seminarer om ledelse, bæredygtighed, pengepolitik og meget mere.
This time I have invited Professor Jonas Hedman to the studio. Jonas worked for the Department of Digitalization at Copenhagen Business School. He has previously joined the podcast and talked about the cashless society. So, Jonas, welcome to.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back here, Benjamin.
Let's start with a little icebreaker.
Yes.
Since you work in the Department of Digitalization, when was your last time you had to make a physical cash transaction?
It was really good that you did send me the questions prior the pod there, so I had to think about this one. So I use three currencies. I use Danish crowns when I'm in Denmark. I live in Sweden, so I use Swedish crowns, and I travel abroad, then I use euro. So the last time I used Danish crowns was this spring or on the ferries between Rødby and Puttgarden, just to get rid of the last Danish coins that I had. So gone. The euro used, cash euro I used the last time was on the 3rd of August on a refuge in the Alps called Refuge de Fys. They don't accept anything except cash there because they don't have any mobile coverage. Swedish coins and notes, I don't even remember the last time I used them.
Yeah, that was actually also a main topic about last podcast when we say they are going to be one of the first countries being totally cashless. Yeah. So the great advantage of cash is when you went to the ferry is that when you got your cheese sandwich or whatever you had on the ferry, you paid it and the receiver got the cash instantly. But this is not always the case when you pay with your credit card. And this is also the topic today. So let's start very briefly. When we say instant payment, what is it and who uses it?
So instant payment, or quite often called or labeled real-time payments, is when the payer's accounts are deducted and at the same time their payee, the receiver of the money, receives it immediately. As quickly as possible, it can be done technologically wise. And that you do in Denmark, it takes a few seconds and then it's done. That is what an instant or real-time payment is. And it's used by individuals, particularly the mobile pay, or is how we do it. Also when we do account transfer at our internet banks or mobile banks. And also companies use it when they do their account transfers. But there are some limitations also of when a payment can be, say, instant. Is it about 500,000 Danish crowns? It takes longer time.
Yes. And now I'm quite curious because you actually decided to write a whole research article about this topic, instant payments, and we're going to dig into it further, but can you maybe first tell a bit about from where did you get the motivation?
So the motivation historically, it was done by my PhD student Juan Giraldo, who is actually defending his thesis on the 15th of December. So he was interested, he has a background from Colombia, and when you have people working abroad, they tend to send money back like immigrants. So that is called remittance payments. So that is the background of it. And that looking into remittance payment, then it became instant payment. Because one of the issues with remittance payments, usually people use like Western Union to send money back, is that it is extremely expensive, up to like 7% in percentage in fees for sending money back home, and that is outrageously expensive in my view.
So for me, instant payments from the outside without any IT background, it should look rather simple. But can you maybe tell me a bit about why was instant payment not invented in the very beginning? Why have there typically been a couple of days where the money has to be settled in?
I think there are two explanations. Is that before we had, say, computers, when you paid someone without cash. You wrote either use a check or another some physical payment order. And it basically took time to mail the information to the receiving banks. And then when they started slowly in the, say, late 50s, early 60s here in Denmark to digitalize the payment infrastructure, they more or less mimicked the manual or the old process. And also that computers that were developed in those days were done to do so-called batch processing. So you do things at the end of the day, you close the book, and then you send things off. But today, I would say that computers are so efficient, and it's actually more or cheaper to build computers that do real-time clearing instead of batch processing. So both in the sense that the process has evolved, but the technology has evolved. Therefore, we have this move towards a instant payment because it's easier, cheaper. But then also there has been a lot of, say, regulatory pressures on going in this direction. But we'll come back to that about how regulation has pushed in this direction.
Can you tell a bit about how this batch processing?
Historically, that the banks had certain days when they did their transactions. So the bank were able to, in a sense, keep the money and get interest on the money by borrowing it to someone and getting interest and so on, or buy options or say bonds and get some kind of interest on the money. That's why it took time to move money from one bank to the other. And in all those transfers between banks, the central bank will always have a role. And the central bank's old systems, old process were as in this batch mode. So historically, if you went to the central bank's office, at the end of the day, the banks were actually shifting money between them via checks. So we owe you this much, and so we are sitting around the table and shuffling checks between each other. And so that is the history why this batch processing, because it was not possible to do real-time clearing between different banks. So that is the historical background in that sense.
Thank you. So I think we should take a practical example. You already mentioned mobile pay, which all Danes are familiar with, and it's a convenient way to transfer money instantly from your mobile device. You simply need to put in your own phone number, bank account, and then the receiver's phone number. And then can you make a digital payment? Can you tell which steps actually underlies this transaction?
You can say that it's 4 steps. The first one is initiation, and then is authorization, clearing, and then final settlement. So if you take the initiation first, that is basically the decision when you as a customer, consumer, payer, whatever you call it, when you decide how am I going to pay for this goods or service, or how I'm going to send money to my kids. You have many different options. You can use cards, you can use mobile pay or account transfers and something like that. So that is initiation. You decide what to do, and then you provide in the next step following that is the authorization and check whether you have the funds available to make this transaction. So the system will check whether you have enough money on your account there to make the payment. And so the initiation leads to authorization, that basically you are giving your credentials to the system to manage this transaction. And that can be done from, depending on if it's the phone or if it's the bank. You put password and MIT-ID and PIN codes, so different version of it. And when a payment is authorized, then it comes clearing. It's basically when the shuffling of funds between different accounts occurs. That means that the bank will collect all the money that you provided initially to send who's going to get the money and so on, when and so on, for what reason, whatever information. And then the shuffling started, and in the settlement, the final steps of the settlement, but also that you as a payer and payee gets information that you have paid and you have received money. So that is these 4 steps that occurs when you do a payment. If it's mobile pay or it's with an account payment in your internet bank, it's the same process basically. There are just slightly different steps, but also like in particular if you do an account transfer, there will be, when it comes to also to mobile pay transaction, there will be checks that is For instance, you're not sending money to a terrorist or something like that, or criminal activities, or potentially if you have a claim on you, those things could be checked along the way when you do a payment.
Can you put a bit more words on step 3, the clearing part? So if I send you 300 crowns, what is it that has to be cleared?
Cleared here is basically that the check that you have the money initially in the initiation as authorization phase there. Then there is a message sent from bank A to bank E, from A to B, so that the money are transferred to that account of the payee. And also in the settlement phase where you send the information to the parties involved in this transaction. And so it's and this happens in a few microseconds when the bank systems basically do this. And then if it's a mobile pay, it happens in real time. But if it's a larger transaction for say above 500,000, then it will just happen a few batch processes during the day. There's just a cap on that. It's not due to technology, it's more to policy rules, and that makes that delay, basically, for larger transactions.
Yeah, so it's maybe to get some control in the money system as well.
So that's the issue with, in general, we say with instant payment or real-time payments, is that there are equally this drive towards instant. There is this desire from society that transactions must be controlled and verified to mitigate money laundering activities, criminal activities. So there is a tension in the current system between instant and control. There will always be this as a conflict of making or clearing a payment as quickly as possible, meanwhile keeping it checked that it's an good transaction.
So would you say we are in a limbo in the moment, or?
No, I think most, say 99.9% of all transactions are good and fine. So the problem for the banks is to find those not good, very few transactions on the big scale, because we do huge numbers of transactions. Like we do hundreds of, say, card payments on an annual basis, hundreds of them, and most of them are okay, those 99.9%, whatever. And when it comes to mobile pay, I don't know how many a day does on average, but it's many. And most of those are fine. There are some occasions, of course, that there are shitty transactions. But if you're doing a shitty payment, people tend to prefer cash. At least what I heard about in Denmark. But in Sweden, for instance, cash is dead. You can't use it for anything, basically. So there's this case up in a town called Sundsvall, where there's called the Swish list. So that was published to a court decision in a proceeding there, and all the phone numbers of people that had been swishing, or Swedish equivalent to mobile pay, swishing a well-known drug dealer, and all their names, all their phone numbers are public. So people have been Googled. So everyone, it's kind of funny story. So in Sweden, they do pay drugs with electronic means, which is maybe not so good.
So why do they do it with instant payment or payments?
Okay, so Swish works like mobile pay, basically.
Yeah.
And if you get cash in Sweden, you can't spend them.
Yeah, but can you only spend it in the supermarket in Sweden?
But how much food is a drug dealer going to buy?
Yeah.
Okay, there are basically three places where you can use cash in Sweden. Okay, larger food markets, yes, that works well. Pharmacies, perfect. And of course, Systembolaget, where you can buy your booze, beer and alcohol. Those are the only three places guaranteed that will accept cash. Otherwise, it is, it depends.
Yeah, so you will be very well feeded, but that's the only thing you can be.
You will be drunk and well fed, basically. And you can get some aspirin afterwards.
Okay. And that's quite interesting, actually. Yeah. But I also heard that it's because the difference is that here in Denmark, you're not allowed to deny cash. But that's not the case in Sweden.
Well, in Sweden, the merchant is allowed to decline cash.
Yeah.
In Denmark, not, because of the old payment law from 82 when you got Dankort. So in Sweden, we have the same legal framework, more or less. Our contract law is it's copy between Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. It's basically the same people wrote the same legislation back in those days in the 20s. And so in Sweden, basically, contract law wins over banking law. But in Denmark, you have rewritten the banking law so that the banking law has a higher precedence than the contract law in the case of payments. So that's the difference. So in Sweden, Swedish merchant can put a sign on his store, I do not accept cash. And that's then when you enter a store, you have entered an agreement with that store that they don't accept cash.
Yeah, and I suppose since it's more expensive to handle cash and they can deny it, then everybody do it.
Yes. Yeah. So nowadays it's more expensive for a average merchant to accept cash than the marginal profit from cash sales, because the cash sales are so limited today.
Do you know approximately how much it costs to accept, let's say, 1,000 Swedish crowns in cash contra and digital?
No, I don't know the exact number. They say it's roughly 3 to 4 times more expensive to accept cash than electronic payments.
That's quite significant.
Yes.
As we talked a bit about before, there's a limit how much you can transfer because you also want to have some control in the systems. But in regarding of instant payments, there actually happened quite a huge agreement some years ago when a system called SEPA was fully launched.
Yes.
And it means that customers, they can make cashless euro payments to everywhere in the European Union. And suddenly you can transfer up to 100,000 euro instantly in less than 10 countries.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like you. It's everywhere, but
so
it's coming.
So SEPA was or is a directive or legislation framework from EU. So the aim is to create one single European payment area. So basically, it would be no difference sending money as within the Eurozone. The issue that we have is that Denmark doesn't have the euro, Sweden doesn't have the euro. So we are not. So it doesn't really work for us to the same extent. So when I do on regular basis send money home to Sweden to spend them there, it takes days. And I just had to change bank in Denmark due to that the former bank was bought by a Danish bank. Now it's even slower. But what is interesting, it's faster to send money from, or at least for me, have been faster to send money from Denmark to, say, Italy than from Sweden to Italy.
Okay.
I don't know why. You're a little bit closer to Italy, of course. You're south.
Yeah.
I don't know if that explains it, but something is so. But I have never tried to do a SEPA payment within the Eurozone, like having an account in, say, Germany and one in the Netherlands. I've not done that. See if it is an instant payment.
But in theory, all transactions up to 100,000 euros should be instant within EU countries with the euro.
Yeah. Yes. Within the Eurozone.
Okay.
So since we are outside the Eurozone, so there needs to be an exchange between Swedish crowns to euros or Danish crowns to euro. So it takes some time, unfortunately. Do you think it's coming, or are they still handling troubles with the SEPA system? Though, so the systems that runs this, they run by the European Central Bank. They would easily manage it. So I think it's more on practical level whether the banks wants to have it as quick transfer, but also that if we're going to send money from, say, Denmark to Germany, it has to pass through the Danish Central Bank and then over to the European Central Bank and then to the bank. So there are a few more steps. One more central bank involved basically in the transaction.
Yes.
So that takes potentially a little bit more time, but should not take so much time as it does.
So is the system still too fragmented, or what is happening?
Well, we wrote about fragmented. So then in that case, it comes to the global perspective on instant payment. And there aren't not that many, say, global payment systems. Of course, you can see Visa, MasterCard, Amex as like global payment systems. But then, usually when you pay abroad, you use your credit line. So then you pay maybe at the end of the month or a few days later. The receiving party will get the money maybe a couple of weeks later and so on. But Western Union is relatively fast, so they have their own, say, network of entities where you can deposit money, send the money, receive the money, and so on. But it is extremely complex. So that's why we come to this, that there is a high degree of fragmentation, even though Europe is becoming more and more consolidated, and with the new systems and the new open finance directive that was in place now in June, we will see a better integration, at least within the Eurozone. If Sweden and Denmark will benefit from that, I hope so. But let's see what the future say.
Yeah, and I totally agree. It's maybe annoying that receiving your payment when working in Denmark and have to transfer it home to Sweden where you live. Yeah. But if we look from a society's perspective, apart from being annoying, are there any social benefits of payments become instantly around Europe?
Absolutely. So first thing is that the receiver, the payee there, will have the money quicker, which will have an impact on the liquidity and stuff like that, and they won't. So I think in general it will have, in the long run, some productivity gains in general for firms, and but for the customers or bank customers, historically said it took, say, 3 days to make a foreign payment. Now it might take 1 day instead. Okay, so those 2 days are gained. So the consequence is that I don't have to plan as much as a payee. I can, I need to pay that thing. Then I can do it. But the cost of implement or making all the systems in Europe SEPA compliant. I read a number, I don't know if it's true, but it sounds not impossible. 20 billion euros to make all the banking systems compliant. Because every system needed to be fixed that were involved in the whole payment infrastructure. So the only one who made gain from this was IT consultancy that had to do all the fixing, or the IT department. But it was driven by some politicians in the EU Parliament that thought this was blah, 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 blah. People should be able to send money quickly, yes. But I don't know whether they had done a proper cost-benefit analysis of this.
Yes, because it's understandable. You have to see it as an investment and what is the return on it. Yeah. It looks like a very low return with...
Or it will take a long time before the return comes. That's my perspective on it. But now everyone has, all the banks in Europe are compliant, and all upcoming systems, and both Denmark, Sweden, and Norway are becoming integrated into the European payment infrastructure. So this is, and I think that in a longer perspective, it will have some clear benefits for society. Hopefully, better productivity, and that will lead to higher growth, more employment, and so on, and we will all become richer. But I think it will take some time.
So we are in progress, I hear. And you also made a research article which is called The Involvement of Global Instant Payments. And it easily get very complicated.
So in the paper there that Juan, my PhD student, and together with Michel Avatel from my department, we wrote, we looked into what drives this push and what forces the payment infrastructure to become more instant oriented. And what we saw there, that there was this transactional need to increase the speed of payments as a key driver, and comes also from the legislation there in a sense. Also that what one can see that on a broad scale, that the payment infrastructure that exists and have been existing for a long time is becoming more and more, say, modular, component based, which makes it more easily to adapt, change, and transform over time, compared to the old systems that was just one big concrete block, very difficult to change, modify. But with a more modern architecture, it becomes easier to make changes, and that is what is used to enable instant payment. And then also this regulatory pressure from EU in particular that EU wants instant payment across. But we can see similar as a tendencies in other parts of the world as well, that there is a push for instant payments on a global scale, both in the States, in Asia and so on. There is this on general, because there's no reason to slow down the process if the technology allows you to do it quickly. The thing that what is a factor that is against us in the Nordics here is that since we were extremely early in digitalizing the whole payment landscape and the whole banking infrastructure, starting late 50s, early 60s, and still components of the core systems in the Nordics are designed, built, developed in the 70s. And they're built for this batch processing. That's how they were designed. So now they have to put layers on to make them instant. So that's how this modularity is, that you can put this layer on top to make this faster processing. So that is the key thing that we identify there, that these are the key mechanisms driving or pushing us towards this instant payment world.
And if we should drag it all together, what would your suggestions be from this research?
What we don't really need to look into more is that, so what we do or did in this paper, and we're still at a fairly high level talking about regulation. So different parts of the regulation, so most of the regulation on related to payments talks about faster. But then you have other regulations within the EU body that says, oh no, hold on, not so fast. So, for instance, there are all the data protection legislation that puts kind of brakes on things. Also, the competition rules also put brakes on collaboration. So banks are not allowed to collaborate, exchange information to a degree that they would like to, because legislation would prohibit them to do that. So there's a really interesting dynamics between different sets of regulation and how that will play into payments. And then now also we have the whole thing with artificial intelligence and how that will come into play within payments. And so I think if we look a few years towards the future, and maybe when we have the metaverse, if that comes, we will basically just think of paying and the payment is done.
That's an interesting ending. I just have a last question before, and it's because you can't make any research about relating it to environmental issues, and you also did it this time.
Yes.
So you state that evolution of instant payment, it drives the society closer to the sustainable development goals.
Yes, and there's particularly one or two of the goals that UN has, and that is towards the poor people. And the issue, or the key issue that United Nations pointed out, was this 7% for make a remittance payment. And so I think instant will decrease or will eliminate or decrease those as a fees that is done for instant payments. But also there's a recent study from the World Bank stating that electronic payment is the best inclusion effort we can do, because if you have electronic money, you need to have an identity, and in many countries, in particular, women doesn't have an identity. But if we have electronic money, then they will have an identity. Otherwise, they can't access the money. So I think that will clearly contribute to the different sustainability goals that UN has envisioned.
Thank you very much, Jonas Hedman, for joining Rig på Viden once again.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
My name is Benjamin Sumofen.
Tak for, at du lyttede med til Rig på Viden. Jeg håber, at du lærte noget, og hvis du nu synes godt af vores podcast, så kan du støtte os ved at følge den på Spotify eller skrive en anbefaling på iTunes. Inde på LinkedIn, der kan du følge André Thormand, Benjamin Sumofen eller Henrik Fode Rasmussen. På genhør.